Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going on a quest to uncover the truth about how we learn best. We've got research articles, expert opinions, and maybe even a few busted myths along the way. Are you ready to dive in?
I am always ready for a learning adventure.
Excellent. Well, you know how we've all heard about learning styles, right? Like some people are visual learners, others are auditory, and some are kinesthetic.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a lot more to the story.
It's fascinating because the idea of tailoring instruction to match someone's preferred learning style, the meshing hypothesis as it's called, just doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
Wait, so you're telling me that all those years of trying to figure out if I was a visual learner were basically for nothing?
While we all have preferences, research shows that those preferences don't actually translate into better learning.
Wow. That's a serious myth busted. But why does it matter? If people feel like they learn better a certain way, isn't that enough?
It might seem harmless, but clinging to this myth can actually limit learning opportunities. Imagine someone avoiding public speaking training because they believe they're a visual learner.
Right.
They could miss a chance to develop a critical skill.
That's a really good point. I never thought about it that way. So instead of trying to box people into these fixed learning styles, what should we be focusing on?
What's truly exciting is the shift towards understanding the specific needs of learners and designing instruction that is supportive and inclusive for everyone.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into that. How can we design learning that really works?
There are some truly fascinating frameworks that can guide us. Frameworks like Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and Richard Mayer's Cognitive Theory of Multimedia Learning.
Those sound pretty impressive, but before we get into the specifics, what about learners who might have unique needs, maybe related to disabilities or neurodiversity?
Yeah.
How do these frameworks address that?
That's a great question. And it's a key part of inclusive learning. For example, someone with autism spectrum disorder might benefit from explicit, rule-based instruction.
That makes sense. I've heard that individuals with ASD often excel at logical thinking.
Yes, and this type of instruction plays to that strength. On the other hand, learners with intellectual disabilities often thrive when we use concrete, simple, and engaging methods.
So it's about recognizing individual needs and tailoring instruction accordingly, not about forcing people into predefined style categories.
Precisely. We're moving away from oversimplified labels and embracing the beautiful complexity of learning.
So how does UDL fit into all of this? You mentioned it as a framework for inclusive learning.
Think of UDL as a blueprint for creating flexible learning environments from the very beginning. It's about anticipating diverse needs and making learning accessible to everyone.
I like that. It's proactive and inclusive rather than trying to tack on accommodations as an afterthought.
Exactly. And UDL is built on 3 core principles: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression.
Okay, those sound pretty important. Break them down for me. What do they actually mean in practice?
Well, multiple means of engagement is all about tapping into what motivates learners. We provide choices, make learning relevant to their interests and goals, and even allow for some autonomy in how they approach a topic.
So it's about making learning meaningful and engaging rather than just forcing everyone to follow the same path.
You got it. And then multiple means of representation is about presenting information in a variety of formats. Think text, visuals, audio, hands-on activities, maybe even virtual reality experiences. It's like offering a learning buffet.
I love that analogy. So it's about recognizing that people process information differently and providing options to cater to those differences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, multiple means of action and expression acknowledges that there are many ways to demonstrate understanding. Instead of just relying on traditional tests or essays, we can allow for projects, presentations, creative performances, even building something with their hands.
So it's about letting people show what they know in ways that feel authentic to them. That's pretty awesome.
It really opens up possibilities. And what's really cool is that UDL isn't just for K-12 or higher education. It's increasingly being applied to adult and corporate learning as well.
Wow, so UDL is like this universal design principle for learning in any context. That's amazing. But what about the actual content? How do we design lessons and materials that are effective regardless of the learning environment?
That's where Richard Mayer's Cognitive Theory of Multimedia Learning, or CTML, comes in.
Okay, CTML. Let's dive into that one. What's the core idea behind it?
CTML is all about using multimedia in a way that aligns with how our brains actually learn. It's rooted in cognitive science, and it helps us avoid common pitfalls like cognitive overload.
Cognitive overload. You mean like when you're trying to cram for an exam and your brain just can't take in any more information?
Exactly. CTML provides guidelines for designing multimedia learning experiences that are effective and engaging without overwhelming the learner.
Okay, I'm definitely on board with avoiding cognitive overload. So how does CTML work? What are some of the key principles?
Well, first, we need to understand that we process information through separate visual and auditory channels.
So that's why it's easier to remember something if we see and hear it rather than just reading it on a page.
You're catching on quickly. And each of these channels has a limited capacity. We can only process so much information at once before things start to get jumbled.
That explains why I can't seem to focus on my work when my kids are blasting music.
And the third key point of CTML is that learning requires active engagement. We can't just passively absorb information. We need to actively process it, make connections, and apply what we're learning.
So it's not about just sitting back and letting the information wash over us. We need to be active participants in the learning process.
Absolutely. And to help us put these principles into action, Mayer has outlined 12 principles of multimedia learning.
12 principles. Okay, give me the highlights. What are some of the most important ones?
One that stands out is the coherence principle. It's all about keeping things concise and avoiding extraneous information that might distract from the main message.
So no more long rambling lectures or PowerPoint slides packed with text.
Ideally not. Then there's the signaling principle, which encourages us to use cues to highlight important points. Think headings, bold text, changes in voice tone, anything that helps learners know what to focus on.
It's like giving them a roadmap to navigate the information. I like that.
And of course, there's the multimedia principle itself, which emphasizes the power of combining words and pictures, rather than relying on words alone. Remember those dual channels we talked about?
Right, tapping into both visual and auditory channels. So instead of a slide with bullet points, you might add a diagram or an image to illustrate the concept.
Precisely. We can also think about the spatial contiguity principle, which suggests placing related text and visuals close together, and the temporal contiguity principle, which encourages us to present corresponding words and images simultaneously.
So it's all about building connections visually and making it easier for the brain to make sense of the information.
You're getting it. And to avoid overwhelming learners, we can use the segmenting principle, which suggests breaking content into smaller, more manageable chunks.
It's like taking a big, intimidating task and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, much less intimidating that way.
Exactly. And for complex material, the pre-training principle reminds us to provide foundational knowledge before diving into the more challenging stuff.
So it's like building a solid foundation before constructing a skyscraper of knowledge.
Perfect analogy. And you've probably heard of the modality principle, using narration with visuals rather than on-screen text with visuals.
Oh, yes. That's so important for accessibility and cognitive load. Reading tons of text on a screen can be exhausting.
Absolutely. And there are a few more that focus on making learning more engaging and relatable, like using a conversational tone and a human voice for narration.
It's like having a friendly guide leading you through the material, rather than a robotic voice droning on in the background. You nailed it. This is so interesting. It seems like CTML can really transform the way we design learning materials. But we've talked about UDL and CTML. Are there any other frameworks we should have on our radar?
You know, there's one more that's worth exploring. David Kolb's experiential learning theory, or ELT.
Okay, ELT. Tell me more. What's the central idea behind this theory?
Kolb proposed a cyclical learning process with 4 stages: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation.
So it's about experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and doing. And it's a cycle, so we're constantly moving through those stages.
Exactly. The idea is that learning is most effective when we engage in this continuous loop.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like a natural way to learn rather than just passively absorbing information. But wait, I thought we were moving away from the idea of learning styles. Didn't Kolb have something to do with learning styles too?
You're right to point that out. Kolb did introduce 4 learning styles based on individual preferences for engaging with this cycle. But like other learning styles models, they've been criticized for oversimplifying things and lacking solid evidence.
So should we just toss ELT out the window altogether?
Not necessarily. While the learning styles aspect is debatable, ELT still offers a valuable framework for designing experiential learning opportunities.
So it's about encouraging learners to actively engage with material, reflect on their experiences, and apply their knowledge in real-world contexts.
You got it. ELT reminds us that learning isn't just about acquiring information, it's about actively constructing knowledge through experience.
I really like that idea. It seems like ELT could be a powerful tool for making learning more hands-on, engaging, and relevant.
Absolutely. And, ELT actually connects beautifully with the other frameworks we've discussed.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here. It sounds like UDL, CTML, and ELT are all pointing us toward a more holistic and learner-centered approach to education.
You're absolutely right. It's not about finding the one right way to learn, but about creating diverse, engaging, and accessible learning experiences that honor the unique needs and strengths of each individual.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. It's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about learning.
Me too.
Yay.
It's fascinating to see how research is challenging traditional assumptions and paving the way for more effective and inclusive learning environments.
I'm ready to keep exploring. What else do we have in store for this deep dive? Okay, so we've explored some pretty amazing frameworks like UDL, CTML, and ELT. But how do we actually put these ideas into action? I'm ready for some practical tips.
That's where the real magic happens. It's one thing to understand the theories, but seeing them come to life is where it gets exciting.
Absolutely. So what are some concrete ways we can apply these frameworks to create truly effective learning experiences?
One of the most important takeaways is the power of using a mix of teaching methods. We need to ditch the one-size-fits-all approach and embrace a variety of strategies that cater to different learning preferences and needs.
So instead of just lecturing or relying solely on textbooks, we should incorporate things like visuals, discussions, hands-on activities, and maybe even a little bit of movement and music.
Precisely. Think about incorporating multimedia elements strategically, just like we discussed with Mayer's principles, and create opportunities for learners to actively interact with the material.
It's about making learning multisensory and engaging. It seems like we learn best when we're actively involved, not just passively listening.
Exactly. And remember, we're not designing for those perceived learning styles, but rather for the nature of the material itself.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like in practice?
Absolutely. Let's say you're teaching a history lesson about ancient Rome. Instead of just having students read a textbook chapter, you could show them a documentary, have them create a timeline, or even build a model of a Roman villa.
Wow, that would bring history to life. And by incorporating different modalities and activities, you're more likely to engage a wider range of learners, right?
That's the idea.
Mm.
It's about creating a rich and varied learning environment that speaks to different strengths and preferences.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like appealing to different senses and learning styles without actually boxing anyone into those categories.
Exactly. We're recognizing the complexity of learners and offering multiple pathways to understanding.
Is there anything else we should keep in mind when designing instruction?
Well, we shouldn't be afraid to challenge our learners. Sometimes stepping outside of one's comfort zone can lead to the most profound learning experiences.
That's a great point. I know from my own experience that the times I've learned the most were often when I was pushed beyond what I thought I could do.
It's that feeling of stretching and growing. Of course, we need to do this in a supportive and scaffolded way, making sure learners have the tools and resources they need to succeed.
It's like that saying, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. We need that challenge to really blossom.
Precisely. And speaking of growth, let's not forget about the importance of aligning instruction with the principles of cognitive science.
We talked about Mayer's CTML, which is definitely rooted in cognitive science. But are there other principles we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Dual coding theory, for example, suggests that we process information more effectively when it's presented in both visual and verbal formats. This ties in nicely with Mayer's multimedia principle.
So whenever possible, we should aim to create learning experiences that engage both the visual and verbal channels of the brain, like using images, diagrams, and other visuals to complement spoken or written explanations.
Precisely. It's about providing multiple pathways for the information to make its way into our long-term memory.
That's fascinating. Are there any other cognitive science gems you can share with us?
Well, there's the spacing effect, which suggests that we learn better when we revisit information at spaced intervals rather than cramming it all in at once.
So instead of pulling an all-nighter before a test, it's better to space out our study sessions over a longer period.
That's the idea. This allows our brains to consolidate information more effectively and move it from short-term to long-term memory. And let's not forget about the retrieval practice effect, which shows that actively recalling information strengthens our memory more than simply rereading it.
So that's why techniques like flashcards and quizzes can be so helpful. They force us to actively retrieve information from memory.
Exactly. And this is where technology can really shine. There are so many apps and platforms now that make it easier to incorporate spaced retrieval practice and make learning more interactive and engaging.
That's amazing. It seems like technology can really help us harness the power of cognitive science to learn more effectively.
Absolutely. But technology is just a tool. The real key is understanding these principles and using them thoughtfully.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about just throwing technology at a problem, it's about using it strategically to enhance learning.
You got it. And, I've found that applying these principles has made a real difference in my own learning journey.
Really? I'd love to hear more about that. How have these frameworks changed the way you approach learning?
Well, for a long time, I was a pretty traditional learner. I'd take tons of notes, highlight everything in my textbooks, and spend hours rereading the same material. But then I started diving into the research on learning and memory, and it completely transformed my approach.
That's fascinating. What were some of the biggest changes you made?
One of the most significant shifts was incorporating more active recall strategies. Instead of just passively rereading my notes, I started trying to recall the information from memory, or creating flashcards to test myself.
Did you notice a difference? Did you find yourself remembering things better?
Absolutely. It felt more challenging at first, but I quickly realized that I was retaining information much better and for much longer periods. I also started experimenting with space retrieval practice, using apps like Anki to schedule my review sessions.
So you were essentially hacking your own brain to learn more effectively.
I guess you could say that. It was
Yeah.
like unlocking a whole new level of learning.
That's so inspiring. It shows that anyone can become a more effective learner by understanding how their brain works and applying these evidence-based strategies.
Absolutely. The brain is incredibly adaptable, and the more we learn about it, the more we can unlock its potential.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about the importance of using diverse instructional methods, challenging learners, aligning instruction with cognitive science, and even incorporating technology strategically. Is there anything else we should consider as we work to create these amazing learning environments?
Well, let's circle back to UDL for a moment. Remember those three core principles: multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression.
Yes, they're like the foundation of creating inclusive and effective learning experiences.
Exactly. And they offer so much guidance. For example, when thinking about engagement, we need to consider what motivates learners. What are their interests? What are their goals? How can we make the learning relevant to their lives?
It's about tapping into that intrinsic motivation, that spark of curiosity that makes us want to learn and grow. And when it comes to representation, we need to think about providing information in a variety of formats to suit different learners.
That's right. Some learners might grasp concepts best through visuals, while others might prefer audio explanations or hands-on activities. It's about providing options and flexibility.
It's like we're building this amazing toolkit of learning strategies, and then there's action and expression, providing multiple ways for learners to show what they know.
Yes, this is about recognizing that intelligence is expressed in many ways and allowing learners to demonstrate their understanding in a way that feels authentic to them.
It's about celebrating the diversity of learners and their unique ways of knowing and expressing themselves.
Precisely. UDL is all about creating those flexible, inclusive, and empowering learning environments.
I'm really starting to see how all of these frameworks fit together. They're like pieces of a puzzle that create a beautiful picture of how we learn best.
And the best part is that these principles can be applied in any learning context, whether it's a traditional classroom, an online course, a corporate training program, or even just personal learning.
So it's not just about changing the way we teach, but about changing the way we think about learning altogether.
Exactly. It's about embracing a learner-centered approach and recognizing that everyone has the potential to learn and grow.
I'm feeling so inspired. What else can we explore on this learning journey?
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. From debunking learning style myths to exploring frameworks like UDL, CTML, and ELT, my brain is buzzing.
It's been quite a journey. And what's remarkable is how all of these ideas are interconnected.
I was just thinking that. It's like we've uncovered these different pieces of the learning puzzle, and now we're starting to see how they all fit together. Exactly. And when we put those pieces together, we get a much richer and more nuanced understanding of how learning truly works.
It's not about finding that one magic formula, but rather about embracing a tapestry of approaches that work together. A tapestry woven with threads of flexibility, accessibility, and engagement.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the essence of what we've been exploring. It's about creating learning experiences that are as diverse and vibrant as the learners themselves.
It's also fascinating to consider how these frameworks challenge traditional ideas about education.
It's a real paradigm shift. For
Mm.
centuries, education has largely been about transmitting knowledge from teacher to student.
The classic image of the sage on the stage imparting wisdom to the eager young minds below.
Precisely. But these frameworks encourage a much more active and learner-centered approach.
It's not about passively absorbing information, but about actively constructing knowledge through experience, reflection, and interaction.
Exactly. It's about empowering learners to take ownership of their learning and to become lifelong seekers of knowledge.
And it strikes me how much emphasis these frameworks place on individual differences.
Yes, we've moved beyond the limitations of learning styles, but we haven't abandoned the recognition that each learner has their own unique strengths, challenges, and preferences.
It's about creating learning environments that are truly inclusive and welcoming to all, regardless of background, ability, or learning profile.
And that's where UDL really shines. It's about designing for accessibility from the very beginning, rather than trying to make adjustments later on.
It's about proactively creating learning experiences that are flexible and adaptable so that everyone can participate and thrive.
This shift toward learner-centeredness and inclusivity is one of the most exciting trends in education today.
It's a recognition that everyone has the potential to learn and grow given the right support and opportunities.
And it represents a move away from that old deficit-based model of education, where the focus was on what learners couldn't do, towards a more asset-based model, where we celebrate their strengths and nurture their potential.
I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from fixing learners to empowering them.
It's also important to remember that this journey towards more effective and inclusive learning is ongoing.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn, more to explore, and more to refine.
Exactly. The field of learning science is constantly evolving, and new research is emerging all the time.
So it's not about finding the final answer, but about embracing a spirit of continuous learning and improvement.
Precisely. And that's something we can all do, whether we're educators, learners, or simply curious individuals who want to understand how our brains work.
This deep dive has been such an incredible learning experience for me. It's made me rethink so much about how I approach learning and teaching.
Me too.
Yeah.
And it's been a joy to explore these ideas with you and with our listeners.
Well, as we wrap up this incredible adventure, I want to leave our listeners with a few thought-provoking questions to ponder.
That's a great idea. A little something to spark further reflection and exploration.
First, I encourage you to think about your own learning experiences. What strategies have worked best for you? What challenges have you faced? How can you apply the insights from this deep dive to enhance your own learning journey?
Those are great questions. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's about finding what works best for you and continuing to experiment and refine your approach.
Second, I challenge you to explore the world of UDL, CTML, and other evidence-based learning frameworks in more depth.
There are so many incredible resources available online, in books, and through professional development opportunities.
Dive in, get curious, and see what resonates with you.
And finally, I encourage you to share your insights and discoveries with others.
Talk to your friends, colleagues, or family members about what you've learned. Start a book club, attend a workshop, or even create your own learning community.
The more we share our knowledge and experiences, the more we can collectively create a world where learning is accessible, engaging, and empowering for all.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of learning.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those learning spirits bright.